Somewhere beyond reality, there's an infinite place that looks unsettling, but at the same time familiar. This nostalgia feels slightly off, as you don't know if you're truly alone or there's something else watching you. Maybe an entity, or just a creation to give a face to your memories, guilts, or fears. The film Backrooms opens up with a found footage of a man lost and alone in endless corridors, illuminated by flickering lights that never seem to end. He tries to contact his team by radio, but sadly, there's no response. There's a heavy feeling of anxiety. Each time he ventures further down these yellow corridors, he encounters more and more out-of-place objects, cabinets, plants, and even billboards embedded in the wall. But the worst part for this man is that he's not alone. A dark silhouette appears out of nowhere. Terrified, he runs at full speed through multiple corridors until he reaches a strange virtual reality room. As he tries to back away, the figure finally catches up to him, violently knocking him to the ground, and both he and his camera crash to the floor. Then we meet Mary, the psychologist as a little girl, whose handprint is imprinted in the cement next to her mother's. It's a memory from her childhood. However, now Mary watches as that house is demolished before her eyes. The imprints of her hands remain there, the last vestige of the past that is slowly fading away. Later, we meet Clark, who arrives at Dr. Mary's office for another therapy session. Dr. Mary explains that people often repeat familiar behaviors because they are the path of the least resistance. For Clark, this means pushing people away to avoid being hurt, leaving him trapped in the same cycle of loneliness. Mary tells him he's alone, but he replies that's not true, that he has employees and clients. However, she insists that despite all that, he's still completely alone. Clark ends up admitting that he's done terrible things, that he's hurt people, and that perhaps he deserves his solitude. But Mary explains that if he truly wants to find a new path, he must confront his past. Mary suggests an exercise they've done before, a role-playing game. They relive the night his wife Barbara kicked him out of the house. Mary plays Barbara, Clark plays himself. Clark had come home drunk that night and accidentally breaks a glass, and in the game, all his anger resurfaces. He reminds her that he pays for absolutely everything, her university, her expenses, her outings, and every single one of her whims. Then he accuses her of abandoning him with all the responsibilities if they were to have children, while she continues chasing her dreams. Finally, Clark explodes, shouting that he's an architect, but is stuck selling furniture, while she's just a 30-year-old student without a job, and that Barbara never helped him with anything. As he relives his argument in front of Mary, he finally lets it all out. Clark apologizes for losing his temper, but Mary tells him that his reaction was normal, and that this is the first step, recognizing what he feels in order to then learn to choose a different path. Then we get to know Clark's world. We see him filming a commercial to promote his furniture store, but everything goes wrong when the chair he's sitting on suddenly breaks, sending him spiraling to the floor in frustration. The reality is actually sad. No one visits his store, no one buys his products, and Clark lives trapped in a constant pressure as he watches everything he built slowly crumble. When they finally arrive to check the electricity meter, Clark argues with the technician again. Annoyed, he demands they lower his bill, since several lights in the store keep flickering. While inspecting the fuse box, they discovered 2 extra switches that seem quite strange. They decide to test the first one, but absolutely nothing happens. Then they flip the second one, and still nothing. Confused, they can't figure out what their function is or why they're mounted horizontally, as if they weren't supposed to be there. Meanwhile, Mary watches her own self-help commercial, where she encourages people to believe that they can change their lives and pursue their dreams. Yet, despite preaching this message, she sits alone at home. As she tries to eat something, she can barely manage a bite. She's staring at the cement footprints of her table, a memory that continues to haunt her and demonstrates that she doesn't really apply what she preaches. At the same time, Clark is watching television while drinking, when suddenly the screen goes black. However, he notices that there's still electricity. He turns on some lamps and we discover that he's sleeping inside his own furniture store. Having been evicted from his home, shortly after, the lights begin to flicker violently. Uncomfortable and frustrated, he decides to go for a drive to clear his mind. He listened to one of Mary's recordings. She explains how the mind builds walls to protect itself, leaving people trapped in watching their lives from behind a lonely window. She encourages them to break through these self-imposed limitations and reclaim control of their lives. This imaginary becomes significant as Clark later drives to his old house, looking at its windows, observing from the outside if he's still clinging to a life he had already lost. Something we can notice from what little we saw of the film's Backrooms in the first lost tape, and from what we've seen of Clark so far, is that this advertisement features the exact same objects that the Backrooms had already replicated in the opening tape, such as the ship's wheel, the credits banner, the beach backdrop, and the furniture. This demonstrates that the Backroom had already been gradually copying Clark's environment before he was even aware of its existence. The advertisement carries enormous emotional weight because it not only represents Clark's desperate effort to save his business, but also what he hates most boast about his own life. Clark wanted to be an architect, and instead, he has to humiliate himself by dressing up as a pirate to attract customers to a cheap furniture store, making that costume and his subsequent fall into the chair the ultimate embodiment of his shame and failure. These are the elements that the Backrooms have perfectly captured, but we'll see that later. The next morning, Clark tries to distract himself by painting on a sheet of paper inside his shop, since no customers have come in all day. Meanwhile, Mary relives childhood memories as she watches a little girl with her mother. Later, Clark turns the television back on, but this time, something even stranger happens. Images of wires and connections in the fuse box appear on the screen. Seconds later, the television shuts off again. A single light comes out of nowhere in the shop. Furious, Clark runs to the fuse box and begins flipping all the circuit breakers one by one until the building is plunged into complete darkness. But then he notices something impossible. A thin, luminous line appears in one of the walls, like a glowing crack that flickers on and off. Intrigued, he slowly approaches it and reaches out to touch it. As soon as his hand touches the surface, he's violently pulled to the other side. Clark falls abruptly into the Backrooms. Dazed, he discovers piles of furniture. Without understanding what is happening, he manages to pass through the wall again and return to the real world. However, curiosity overcomes fear. He decides to cross back to the other side to explore what else is hidden in that impossible place. Let's take a second to give some context about the Backrooms. There's a photo that many people recognize even if they've never been able to pinpoint exactly what they saw in it. A room, yellow walls, a specific shade of yellow found in cheap offices, a faded carpet, a greenish hue that once was but no longer is, lighting with buzzing fluorescent tubes. Though the image itself is inaudible, and there's no one there. No windows, no visible exits, just a long, repeating hallway, a room that stretches on, and an architect that seems to continue without destination or purpose. This image was posting on 4chan on May 14th, 2019, with no known author or context, to which someone wrote a few lines below describing a catastrophe. If you're not careful, if you let your guard down, you can disconnect from reality and end up trapped inside the Backrooms, an almost infinite space. Empty blocks, identical and endless, almost 30 times the total surface area of the Earth, with no way out, with something lurking there that heard you before you heard it. In the following days, the image began to circulate. In the months that followed, it became a full-blown internet phenomenon, and years later, it transferred into YouTube videos, collaborative wikis, video games, horror productions, found footage, and above all, the aforementioned. A recognizable aesthetic that millions of people returned to with a mixture of repulsion and attraction they couldn't quite explain. Photos with that dreamlike texture, specifically from a dream that no one can't quite remember. Have you ever been in a place where everything feels weird, like you shouldn't be there? Well, that's exactly a liminal space. A liminal space is a transition site designed to pass through them, not to stay. Transit spaces that were never designed to be inhabited, but rather to be crossed, to connect one place to another, with the capacity to temporarily house that which does not have a permanent home. An example could be the narrow corridors, empty airports, night schools, shopping malls without people. These are the spaces that exist between one point and another. That's why they feel so strange. The disturbing thing is not the place, but the moment. A normal space full of people looks good, but the same place empty or illuminated with old lights can activate an alert in your brain as if something is out of place. It is the perfect mix of nostalgia, loneliness, and fear. On the internet, they have become quite popular because they look like dream scenarios or nightmares. Many say that liminal spaces make you feel like you're about to remember something, maybe childhood memories, or about to get lost in another level of reality. After Clark returned to the Backrooms, he walked through endless corridors until he found several empty rooms. He finally arrived at the sign that said stop, but right next to it, he notices a half-open door leading to another room. Upon entering, he found a dead bird laying on the floor. Further on, he discovered an even larger rooms, filled with chairs scattered in all directions. Then he heard a voice. It sounded like a woman speaking French. Shortly after, a man's voice joined in. Following the sound, Clark spotted a motionless figure in the distance. Without thinking too much, he approached, only to discover it was a cardboard cutout connected to a radio. Suddenly, several voices began to speak simultaneously in different languages. By the way, the radio is playing the audio of greetings in 55 languages from the Golden Record on the continuous loop, which is the record that NASA sent into space in 1977. It acts as a time capsule and a cosmic message containing the diverse sounds, languages, music, and images of Earth. But here, it's deliberately placed there with a camera pointed at it, as if someone was trying to attract whatever it is with noise and trick them into appearing in order to get clear images of what they are, and if possible, capture one for examination. Astonished, he followed the cable connected to the figure until he reaches another room. There, he also saw a kind of camera. He tried to open the door and push hard, but it was completely sealed. Clark inspected the strange place more closely and finally discovered a small, hidden door, as if it were a secret hiding place. Upon opening it, he finds an abandoned backpack near the entrance to a narrow tunnel. He discovers multiple IDs belonging to different unknown people. This only increases his unease, but he still decides to venture into a small passageway. Crossing it, he arrives into another perplexing room. On the floor are sandals and shoes, partially sunk, as if trapped in quicksand. However, when Clark steps on the surface, it feels completely solid. There's also a solitary chair in the middle of the room. Confused, he notices a hole in the floor. Taking a closer look, he sees a huge pile of chairs stacked many meters below, but at that moment, he hears a strange noise. Following the sound, he approaches the tunnel he came from and catches a glimpse of the cardboard doll violently smashed against the other side. Alarmed, he looks for another way out and finds a small side door. He goes through it and appears in front of the stop sign that he has seen before. Disoriented, he goes back to the area where the furniture is and tries to escape by passing through the luminous wall, just as he did the first time, but he can't. After several attempts, he finally manages to cross back into the real world. Intrigued, he goes back inside once more, and this time, he takes a chair. With great effort, he manages to drag it out with him. This confirms for him that everything is real. Meanwhile, we see that someone else is silently monitoring everything that happens inside the Backrooms. Clark is a completely broken man. He's a failed architect with a bankrupt business who sleeps in his studio and is convinced he's hurting people. That's why, in his sessions with a psychologist, he repeatedly says he should be alone. Clark believes he deserves to be trapped in his solitude and vehemently despises his current life, which completely changes how the Backrooms affect him. When Clark discovers the entrance to the Backrooms, he finds a place that perfectly reflects how he sees his own life. Endless hallways, empty rooms, and above all, furniture scattered everywhere. When the characters listen to Mary's self-help tape, she talks about how our consciousness is a room full of constantly evolving memories, warning that an untrained mind will build walls to protect itself from outside world, creating a feeling of not belonging. In the next therapy session with Mary, which takes place several days later, since Clark has already drawn up maps and confesses his fear of getting lost, a conversation unfolds that reveals the physical nature of Backrooms in its simplest form. Clark explains to Mary very simply what this place is, telling her that at first it looks like a giant office building, but as you move forward, you realize that nothing makes sense. Compared to asking someone to draw a dog based solely on verbal description, assuming this person has never seen a dog, which will result in drawing that looks like similar from afar, but misses the essential details up close. Mary doesn't believe in him and suspects he's been drinking again. Clark leaves very angry, vowing to return with proof, at which point she'll owe a huge apology. Determined to uncover the truth, he seeks out Kat and boyfriend Bobby. They are the cameramen for his commercials, and he asks for their help investigating what's happening at his store. The next day, the three return to the location, prepared for the expedition. Clark explains the plan. They will all be secured with safety ropes and will carry supplies. He also shows them the markings he left both at the entrance and inside the back room to help them find their way. Kat and Bobby don't quite believe him until they go through the wall. The impact leaves them completely shocked. Bobby goes in first, followed by Kat, who has no choice but to go with them. As they move forward, they ask whose furniture is piled up. Clark admits he doesn't know, but he assures them that sooner or later they will find out. Bobby records every detail with his camera as they explore. At one point, Clark mentions he's seen something that looks like an empty pool further down the road. Nearby, they find a vertical tunnel. Since Bobby is one operating the camera, they decide that he'll be the one to go down. They tie him with the rope so they can pull him up later. He slowly begins to descend. When he reaches the bottom, he discovers piles of old, dirty clothes scattered on the floor. Further on, he finds another room filled with abandoned objects. He also makes out the shattered remains of the strange cardboard cutout they saw earlier. In another nearby room, a light flickers intermittently. Bobby tries to approach, but the rope has reached its limit. Then, as he turns, he notices something terrifying. A shadow seems to be moving, following him. Panicked, he immediately demands to be pulled up. Clark and Kat pull hard on the rope and manage to pull him out just in time. Although Clark and Kat manage to start pulling Bobby up, they can't let go of the rope in time. Suddenly, a brutal force pulls him from the depths, and Bobby is violently dragged down. Clark and Kat try desperately to grab hold of him, but all their efforts are in vain. The force ends up dragging them down the tunnel as well. They fall abruptly to the bottom. In the confusion, they can barely make out a strange creature dragging Bobby's body through the darkness. Seconds later, only a trail of blood remains as Kat desperately chases after her boyfriend, while Clark tries to follow her, but soon gets lost among the countless corridors of the labyrinth. He wanders through locker rooms, laundries, and rooms with Christmas trees emitting a red light until he sees a figure. It's a deformed man fused with a wheelchair who turns on a lamp. Then, a redheaded woman with a malformed face runs towards him. Clark flees from these figures until he reaches the empty pool he had mentioned earlier. From there, he hears Kat's voice calling for help, drops the camera on the ground and runs to try and reach her. But to Clark, he's a wall. To her, a pane of glass. Neither can see the other. When he looks for a way out, a very tall figure raises the camera and Kat yells that there's something behind him. The image cuts out. At that moment, the story transports us to the past. We see a little girl approach her bedroom window. It's Mary as a child. Curiously, she pushes aside the newspaper covering the glass to look outside, but just then her mother appears and scolds her. She tells her she should never leave the house, that everything outside is dangerous, and that bad people are everywhere. Mary lived practically locked away. Suddenly, someone rings the doorbell. Moments later, something violently shakens the house. Mary introduced herself as the therapist, whose philosophy consists of opening the inner window, that is, recognizing the walls built by trauma and freeing oneself from them. However, Mary is a character with a very deep wound stemming from her childhood. The film opens with demolitions of her house, yet she can't help but take a small fragment of it with her, the imprint of her hand, embedded in cement from when she, as a child, and her mother left her there. A symbol of how the wound of everything that happened with her mother is petrified like a heavy rock that she carries wherever she goes. While she speaks of how we must destroy paths we forged in childhood to allow new ones to be created, but she's the complete opposite of what she teaches. As a child, she was trapped with a mother dominated by fear of the outside world. She couldn't help her or prevent her hospitalization, and although it was never a child's responsibility to save her mother, Mary may have grown up with the feeling that she could have done something. Perhaps that's why she became a therapist, to try to save, through her patience, the mother she couldn't save. There's nothing wrong with that in itself. And let me clarify that the issue isn't that therapists can't help someone when they're not well, when they have their own problems, but rather that Mary, specifically, feels like an hypocrite, building her professional persona around a message and ideas that herself doesn't apply to her own life. In the house where she's lived as a child, we see things that remind us of the backrooms. Often spaces connected to reality also evoke a sense of liminality. In other words, the film takes liminality out of the realm of the backrooms and introduces it. For example, to the furniture store where Clark works, to Mary's childhood home, to Katie's and Bobby's house, making you think that the characters were already trapped long before going to the backrooms, showing how these traumas supposedly confined to the characters' minds are also projected onto the real world. Therefore, for me, this directional intention suggests that although there's a physical boundary between the backrooms and the real world, the only truth is that these labyrinths have always existed metaphorically within the characters' minds. The adult Mary remains motionless, recalling that traumatic episode as she stares at the imprint of her hand in the cement. Then her phone rings. It's Clark. His voice is agitated, and he tells her that he finally opened the window she spoke of in her talks, and he doesn't intend to return. It is as if this window were something evil. She raises the question of whether it can truly help anyone and whether her message holds any weight. But for now, intrigued and alarmed, Mary decides to go to the store immediately. Meanwhile, we see the scientist again from before. Through his hidden cameras in the backrooms, Clark's television commercial appears in one of the screens, and upon seeing it, it seems to recognize it. Later, when Mary arrives at the store, she discovers it's been closed for some time. The entrance is covered in notices and announcements, but the main door remains ajar. She enters cautiously and notices the lights flickering intermittently. Guided by tuition, she goes down to the basement and finds Clark's notes and maps. There, she also discovers a strange luminous crack in the wall, recalling everything he told her. She approaches slowly, though she can hardly believe it, passes through the wall. On the other side, we discover that the furniture has disappeared. She begins to walk through the vast space while calling for Clark. She moves on to the other room, filled with office furniture, and then goes through a door that leads to a room full of chairs. The voices are heard again. Following Clark's trails, she arrives at a room filled with chairs, where a mural depicts many things that we can discuss later on. But among those, there's a monster wearing a pirate hat. She hears a voice, and it's Clark, quieter and stranger. He tells her she was making too much noise. Mary turns around, startled, and sees him standing before her, strangely calm. Intrigued, she asks him exactly where they are. Clark replies, "It's every place that ever was." A sudden noise makes Mary jump. Clark tells her to calm down and assures her that there's nothing to fear, that it's just him, that she knows him, that he positions himself behind her, and without warning, suffocates her until she loses consciousness. Meanwhile, we see another scene from Mary's past. Following the incident in her childhood, her mother was committed to a psychiatric institution, leaving her completely alone. Then, the little girl sat in the corner of her house, staring at the newspaper covered in windows. The camera descended to almost identical copy of that room, and with each level, the place changes a little more, becoming more distorted, like a fading memory, until it reaches the backrooms. This dimension recalls spaces, and the more it recalls them, the less it recalls them. A world that generates itself from forgetting. It's every place that ever was, said Clark, an architect built by disintegrating memory. Gaston Bachelard, a French philosopher who dedicated much of his work to explore the relationship between space and memory, wrote that memories are stronger when anchored in places, that spaces are the vessels in which time is disposited and solidified. Liminal spaces exploit precisely this. They are familiar places emptied of their inhabitants, which transform them into empty boxes of time and structures that evoke an experience without ever being able to complete it. Hence the strange and desolate atmospheric feeling of the place that's normally full of people, but is now empty. Conceptually, backrooms are the extreme and cruel version of the atmosphere. If liminal spaces produce that unsettling nostalgia for what is absent, backrooms produce terror because of eternity of that absence. There is no way out. The corridor continues. The room replicates itself. The architect has no purpose because it was generated by a dimension that does not intend for it to be inhabited by anyone. They're just memories of the real world that become disoriented the more they spend inside the place. Mary wakes up tied to a chair in front of a dining room. Clark, now speaking in first person, repeats the same words Mary said to him at the beginning of the film. An untrained mind gets trapped in habits and loops. He explains that to protect himself as a child, he learned to push others away before they could hurt him, and that as an adult, he's still trapped right where he started. On the table alone are 3 copies of human lives. The man in the wheelchair, the redhead woman that chased him earlier, and a bearded man. Mary asks who they are. Clark explains that this place creates them, or rather, remembers them, and that the harder he tries to remember them, the worse he gets. Outside, there's a man in a stripped shirt. Here, only an imperfect memory remains. The same is true of the building and the rooms. They are flawed reconstructions of his own memories. He says that in a way, they're better than the originals because they feel nothing. They simply exist, and they can even be eaten. Then, with an unsettling composure, he opens the cavity in the abdomen of one of the figures and extracts a cotton-like substance. He carefully places it on the plates. Then, he shows Mary something even more terrifying. Inside the refrigerator is the head of Kat, blaming her for ending up like this. Horrified, Mary tries to remain calm and tells him she wants to help, but first he must let her go. Clark immediately refuses. Desperate, Mary begins to apologize for not believing him sooner. He yells at the distorted version of his wife to apologize, but she does nothing. He rips off her scalp to give it to Mary as a wig and asks her to play the role of Barbara in a role-playing exercise. The same exercise Mary used in therapy to help him process his conflicts. Then the scene begins. With a strained voice, Clark plays the role of himself the night his wife kicked him out of the house, but he keeps getting more and more frustrated. Finally, Mary grows tired of feeding Clark's fantasy and decides to tell him the truth. She confesses that he was kicked out of their house because of his own actions. It wasn't because of the drinking or being drunk, as he always wanted to believe. The real reason was his constant complaining, his inability to take responsibility, and his habit of always blaming others for everything that went wrong. Mary tells him that this has always been his problem. He never accepts that anything could be his fault. The words hit Clark hard. For a moment, he seems to understand. Clark asked how to stop being like this, and Mary, the therapist who promised to open the windows, replies she honestly has no idea. She can't help him. It's not up to her. She can't save anyone. Clark breaks down in tears, confessing that he doesn't even think he wants to change. That's the first time in a long time he feels like he's where he's meant to be. Mary tells him to stay then, but to let her go. The fact that Mary tells Clark she can't help him is simply the hopelessness she's been carrying all this time. She's been trying to save so many people when she can't even save herself. She can't break down her own emotional walls, much less help someone who doesn't want to help himself, and who has only sunk into the darkness she couldn't prevent. Someone who prefers not to change, to remain the same person, because it's easier. He just wants to hear again and again that he hasn't done anything wrong, that he's not to blame for anything that's happened. But that's when the darkness will return against him. Clark remains silent, and after a few seconds, he slowly approaches and begins to untie her. She seems to have accepted his words. However, at that very moment, the strange woman who had been standing motionless beside them suddenly becomes agitated and desperately begins searching for a way out. Then the creature from the drawings appears. A monstrous version of himself appears, gigantic, deformed, and dressed in the pirate costume of his commercial. Captain Clark. He tries to calm the monster. He tells him that Mary assures him that they don't need to change. It's just the way they were wired. But the captain lifts up and begins to devour him alive. As we know, this place is distorted copies of memories, like objects, places, and also people. And as a person has thoughts and emotions and burdens, The Backrooms begin to reconstruct him, since Clark has been practically living inside his shop for some time, and from the copy emerged the hostile and violent figure of Captain Clark. The question is, why in such an aggressive way? To answer that, we have to look at Clark from within. He was a deeply frustrated man. He was never able to pursue his vocations as an architect. He ended up managing a furniture store that he wasn't passionate about and that wasn't even doing well. He had to film humiliating commercials dressed as a pirate. This pirate image represents all of this burden and frustration, the darkest part of him. From his perspective, he gave up his aspirations to pay for the house and support his wife's career, who ultimately kicked him out. His pain was understandable. The problem wasn't what he felt, but what he did with it. His frustration led him to alcohol, which unleashed his anger, and the anger was directed primarily at his wife, whom he blamed for everything. The relationship deteriorated until she kicked him out. It makes sense that the distorted memory of Barbara, his ex-wife, would have shown her running in terror when Captain Clark approached. If the monster embodies Clark's fury and violence, Barbara's distorted memory also retains the fear that provoked it in her. But notice the underlying pattern. Clark always blamed others and never acknowledged his own role. If he drank too much, it was the job's fault. If he hated his job, it was the world's fault. If he was fired, it was his wife's fault. And if he was aggressive, because that's just who he is. Although many of the situations that happen to us are not our fault, the way we respond to them is. And using alcohol and aggressive communication with his wife was not the right way to do it. And then Clark went to therapy with Mary. Perhaps part of him did want to break free from his cycle, but another part sought out a confirmation that he had never been responsible. It seems to me that, over time, the second part ended up winding out. Clark accepted to hear that he was right, that he hadn't done anything wrong, and this is confirmed when he wants to play the role-playing game with Mary again, in search for this validation. That's where Captain Clark comes from. The Backrooms absorbed the store and also the anger, frustration, and impulses that Clark had accumulated for years, materializing them into that creature. And Clark had his moment of awareness when Mary confronted him. He acknowledged his responsibility and asked how to stop it, but he ended up choosing to stay the same and being lost in his own misery. As the drawing on the mural showed us, Clark never confronted his darkness. Instead, he befriended it and sank into it, hiding behind the accuse. That's just how I'm wired. That's why Captain Clark appeared right after and devoured him. It was a symbolic way of showing how his own anger, his victimhood, and his resentment ended up consuming him. Taking advantage of the confusion, Mary manages to escape. She crosses a house in an impulse neighborhood. The intense chase continues through places full of furniture and the edge of the abyss. With no other option, she begins to climb the walls, using any ledge to propel herself and escape. After tremendous effort, she manages to get out, leaving the creature behind. Upon reaching the top, she discovers something unsettling. She's in a place identical to Clark's shop, yet different. The layout seems similar, although the furniture is completely different. With a last glimmer of hope, Mary runs to the front door and tries to open it to get out. But she can't. She's trapped, and it seems she can't run away any further. The pirate limps up to her on his peg leg, but Mary breaks it with a coat rack, knocking him down. His impact with the cardboard box triggers a sensor. The tanks release a sleeping gas. Mary inhales it too, and just as the pirate is about to grab her, she pulls a cement block from her childhood pocket, the one she carries everywhere, and smashes it into the face. While the monster recovers, she manages to slap through a crack too small for him. On the other side, one of the men in the yellow suits is waiting, and sprays her with gas. Unlike Clark, Mary accepted her darkness, but didn't surrender to the Backrooms. She tried to escape, and when she could, she faced her fear head-on. Mary's cathartic moment comes when Clark asks her if she can stop being the way she is. She admits she doesn't know, that it isn't entirely up to her, and that she can't save everyone. If you look closely at her face when she says that last part, you can almost see the realization hit her. She finally understood something about herself. Mary had spent years carrying the belief that she had been able to save her mother as a child, and that same guilt followed her until her relationship with others. But she realizes that helping someone and saving them are two different things. As a therapist, she can listen to them and guide them, but she cannot change them or renew them into totally new people, as she herself sold to others in the tape that she internally despised so much. That realization comes full circle during the final fight. Mary uses the cement imprint of her childhood hand, the last physical reminder of that part of her life, to break free from both entity and the guilt she's been carrying. When she smashes it, she finally destroys the thing that kept her trapped for so long. Mary is taken to a secret facility where she undergoes x-rays and multiple medical examinations as she's led through various corridors. She catches a glimpse of the creature's body. Shortly after, Phil appears before her, the man who had been watching Clark and her via the security cameras. He introduces himself and asks her how she gained access to the Backrooms. He reveals that years ago, His organization manufactured MRI machines, but everything changed when they accidentally discovered the existence of Backrooms. Their mission has been to investigate them. Phil confesses that he himself was once trapped there. Although he has spent years studying it, he admits that he still doesn't know how to explain it. Mary explains it's like describing a dog to someone who's never seen one and asking them to draw it. The man nods. Mary understands that he wants her to describe the place. Will they let her go? Phil replies that this decision isn't up to him, and replies with the final piece of bad news. Doors are opening everywhere. Mary dissociates, hearing wine chimes as Phil's voice fades away. The film ends up with a tour of Backrooms that imperfectly recall different places in Mary's life. Her childhood home, now demolished but with imprints still visible, her office with furniture fused to the floor, a backstory where copies of her book pierce the floor, a post with missing persons posters for Kat and Bobby, the furniture store, and an interrogation room where a distorted copy of Mary herself remains motionless. And that brings us to the metaphor behind the Backrooms. Mary describes the mind as a room filled with memories, where we build walls around ourselves to survive. Those defenses can protect us, but over time, they can also become the walls that keep us trapped. That's what the Backrooms represent, the mental spaces created by our wounds, where we keep repeating the same patterns while seeing the world through the filters of our past. We all have our Backrooms, those places we see in our dreams that, here awaken this strange feeling of having been there before. We carry old defenses into our present lives and sometimes don't realize they're keeping us in the same place. Both Clark and Mary eventually recognize their own Backrooms, but they make different choices. Clark sees the way out and chooses to stay in the loop. Mary recognizes hers and decides to respond differently. And maybe that's what the film ultimately asks us to do. Look at the walls we've built, understand what they are, and find the courage to step through the cracks, instead of continuing down the same familiar path.